for doing this. This is a very important topic and something that I've been really diving in the rabbit hole in lately. For folks that don't know you, can you introduce yourself and let everyone know what your area of expertise is?
Hello everyone. My name is Dr. Fay Couceiro. I work at the University of Portsmouth in England, and my speciality is biogeochemistry and environmental pollution. That means I pretty much study any kind of pollutant that can get into our environment, where it comes from, how it moves through the environment, where it ends up. But I've been particularly interested in microplastics for the last 5 or 6 years.
What piqued your interest in this?
It was actually, as somebody who studies pollution, I tend to work in the chemical or the biological. That's the standard thing that you look for, so chemical or a biological pathogen. But this is a physical particle. And if you like, it completes the set that you've got the physical, the biological, and the chemical. And I was very intrigued into how heavy metals and pathogens were absorbing onto the microplastics. And then I got interested in the microplastics themselves, not just as a vector, but as themselves.
Are we every article that I see, it seems like it's gloom and doom, like we're just destined to succumb to all the plastic. So is that you being in it and you studying this all the time? Do you get overwhelmed and you feel like there's no way out?
No, I'm a generally optimistic person. And I do believe that human ingenuity is like nothing else. We are an incredibly adaptive species, and we are good at digging ourselves out of the messes we get ourselves into, unfortunately. I think perhaps COVID is a great talking point about how people, if they come together, and that's the key here, if they come together, they can do amazing things. If you can get everybody facing in the same direction. So I do believe that we can improve the plastic pollution problem that we have. We are going to be dealing with it for generations. And I think what the key thing to do now is to get the plans in place to help our children and our grandchildren deal with this problem going forward, rather than just ignoring it and pretending it's not happening. I think we just need to face facts, get a grip with it. Do I think we're going to have problems? Yes, but I think they are surmountable.
What was the first key indicator for you that you realized this was a problem? I mean, obviously it's polluting the ocean. We can see all that, right? We can visibly see all that as just normal people that aren't studying this. But from a biological perspective and from a human perspective in our bodies, what was the telltale sign, and what kind of started you down this trail?
So as I say, I'm an environmental pollution person. So I started in the environment. I actually started looking in sewage. I know, very attractive subject for many people. It's an area of huge pollution. We all produce sewage, and therefore it is an issue that we have to deal with. And that's something that I feel strongly about, dealing with our problems. So I was working there I looked at microplastics. And what we found was that the smaller you look, the more there are. So initially we thought there weren't too many, and then we got the technology to look smaller, and we're like, there's a lot more, and it's exponential growth. And once I started to realize the size of these, this is when it started to concern me in terms of a human health perspective, and realizing that actually, if they are this small, we don't know we're eating them, we don't know we're breathing them in, and they could be doing serious damage to us. So I was very English. I was down the pub, and somebody said, so why do I care? It's in the oceans. Why do I care? Because that's all we'd really thought about. And I said, well, you should care because you're eating it. And they said, oh, well, I don't eat fish. I was like, but you eat vegetables, you eat meat, you eat all these other things, and all of them have microplastics in them. The packaging that surrounds our food is producing microplastics on them, as well as it being inside the food. And then I started working with the local hospital. They have a respiratory team. They were very keen to have a look at this as well. And I started to see it inside us, in our lungs, in particularly asthma and COPD patients. And that's when I thought, really, we need to tackle this. We need to focus on this as a specific area now.
What are some of the ways that we're getting exposed to these microplastics? Is it all from food, or is it? I mean, I've read some articles where we're breathing this because it escapes in our house, so it gets in our ventilation system. So it's basically everywhere. But what's the number one way that we're getting these microplastics in our bodies?
So there's three ways any pollutant can get into our body. That's through our skin, through our food, or we breathe it in. That's pretty much the only route for anything to get into us. Through our skin, there's not been any evidence that the microplastics are penetrating the skin cells. So we are covered in them. There's been work that's looked at, brushing out people's hair and seeing how many are in their hair every day, and seeing that they are just being rained down from the air onto them. But in terms of human health, that's probably not a huge impact. The two impacts are breathing in and eating them. A lot of it has to do with our packaging, as I said. So with our food, there are three ways that it's always three, three ways the microplastics can get into our food. Either the soil or the food stock for meat, or the soil where the vegetables are growing. They have microplastics in. So in Europe, we put sewage sludge onto land as a fertilizer. And of course, there's a lot of microplastics in that. So we're spreading the microplastics all over our food, unfortunately. So they can get into the vegetables that way. So there's microplastics in the things we eat. Yeah. But then we cover them in plastic packaging. And the plastic packaging itself, there are pros and cons in terms of climate change and things. But particularly anything that we microwave in or put in the oven, these plastic bags, you can buy vegetables. So, you think you're being really healthy. You buy some carrots and broccoli in a bag, you pierce them with a fork, you stick them in the microwave. Unfortunately, it's the heating from the microwave really produces quite a lot of microplastics, and they fall onto your food. So you've got it in your food and now on your food. And then if you're having cold food, you're having a buffet, you've got friends around, you've got snacks, there's microplastics in the air and they're falling onto your food. So there's all these different ways that you can eat them. And then, of course, because it's in the air, you're constantly breathing them in. Outside is actually better because you've got a lot of air. So they're quite dilute. There's not that many out there, but you are breathing them in outside. But in our house, if you have maybe a nylon carpet or a polypropylene carpet, if your sofas are fabric, most of those are polyester. A lot of clothing is polyester. So you're right next to the source. So you're literally, if you're wearing a fleece, for example, they are very bad at releasing fibers, and therefore you'll be likely to be breathing them in and eating those constantly throughout the day.
I saw a report a couple of weeks ago that it was centered around, I think, sports bras for women. And it was saying, like, you're exposed to cancerous materials, and more so if you sweat in it. Like you're talking about those clothes, like you're more susceptible to leach these things off into your body if you're sweating, or if you heat up your skin, because they can leach into your skin that way. Is that what you're talking about?
Not so much. Just that the clothes themselves just shed. So when you put your clothes in the dryer, mm-hmm. and then you have to defluff your dryer, right?
Yeah.
Imagine that your clothes are polyester, and you think if you put like a dressing gown or something that's really like heavy fabric in, there's loads of them, yeah? Well, what you don't realize is you think that's just in the dryer, but actually every single day, every time, you move that material and it swishes itself, those particles are just coming off in the air. It's just that there's so small you don't see them. They're not in one big clump. So it's not anything that's happening because of the way we're wearing them. It's just to do with the fabric itself. It breaks down naturally. All materials do. Cotton does, everything else. But the theory is that cotton is biodegradable, and therefore it's not going to be hanging around causing us problems because it's a more natural material.
What are some of the health detriments that these microplastics are causing us? That you mentioned they get into our blood, and you've seen them in the lungs. What effects does that cause?
So there's we're really at the early stages of this work at the moment, as a community, as a scientific community, because quite rightly, you cannot experiment on people. This is not something that you can go out and feed people lots of microplastics and see what happens. So we're very, very early stages. There's more anecdotal evidence where we take cells and we grow them up in the lab, like lung cells, for example, and then we expose them to microplastics, and we make assumptions about how they are doing the same inside us. So I think there's a lot of negativity. Some people who don't like the idea of us causing problems for plastic manufacturers say, well, how do you know? But I think you have to remember, we've only really been studying this for the last few years, and it's going to take decades to build up a huge scientific body of evidence. But the early indications are not good. At very, very high concentrations, like places where they are manufacturing fabrics, so in a fabric manufacturing warehouse, and the concentrations in the air are extremely high. You see things, very heavy asthma in symptoms. There are some cancerous side effects. You see cancers that have coalesced and formed around the fibers that are in the lungs. In the gut, there has been discussion about irritable bowel syndrome, that the microplastics are damaging the cells. They scratch them, and they're causing an inflammatory response there. But possibly even more worrying is they are changing the microbial community in our gut. That might not sound very interesting. Again, I understand it's a little bit technical, but basically our gut health pretty much decides how healthy the rest of us are, even including our mental well-being. It impacts how we feel, how much energy we have that day. So if you start changing the gut microflora, the bacteria in our gut, you can be having really quite far-reaching effects on health. What those effects are, we're still working on.
Yeah, I just read Dr. David Montgomery's book. Dang it, what is it called? Hidden Half of Nature. Have you read that book, or you heard of it? Oh God! So it's when you were talking about how affecting your gut microbiome. It's basically all that. He's tying soil health to our human health, and it's very interesting. I didn't know, so I knew that microplastics could be in the soil, but I never knew that the vegetables could grow with the microplastics inside them. So that's very scary to me.
Yeah, there was some great work that came out of Italy, Italian university, where they started this work, and we've done work on it since. But you digest a piece of apple or something like that, and you see, and the microplastics are present inside, and the only way they could have got there is that they are growing. They're being absorbed into them, whether that's from the soil or from the air landing on them as they're growing, but they are definitely getting into a number of our food sources.
Was that study done on organic soil, or was it just a conventional farming method?
Just done. Obviously, again, that this is early days, so there will be work to be done on this. It wasn't done on organic soil. It wasn't a organic versus a non-organic soil, so that's not what was done. My feel will be, because I've studied microplastics in all of the environments, that they will be present in anything, but they will be at lower concentrations in soils that have lower concentrations of microplastics. So when they did the work that came out recently about where microplastics are in our bodies, that they're in our blood and things, basically what you saw is we all have them. It really doesn't, unfortunately, it's not like you can say, if I go organic, I won't have microplastics, but you may well have less, is the idea.
Is there a way to naturally excrete this stuff from our bodies, or once you absorb them, they stay?
So the larger particles basically go straight through us, which is what people thought initially. They thought actually ingestion, so eating them probably wasn't too harmful because they'll go straight through. And I think that is the case for a lot of the larger pieces of microplastics. You still couldn't see them, but they're too big to get into our cells. That they're the ones who might be impacting the microbiome in our gut. But in terms of the smaller particles, what we start to get into is nanoplastics, the really tiny ones. And I mean, some of those have actually been designed specifically to get into our cells. There are medicines that use microplastics to deliver the medicine to the cells, in which case the good things that you get from it, the positive aspects outweigh any negative aspects, because these people are desperately in need of that drug reaching those cells, so you can't say that that's a bad thing. But if you think about that, that becomes very scary, in the fact that they're using plastic for that and we're all eating it. So that means we are all getting it into our body, and the likelihood is, we are getting it into our cells.
What kind of support do you get from these manufacturing companies or these chemical companies that produce plastics? Do you get any support from them? Are they helping on these studies? What does that look like in what you're seeing?
So obviously, I'm not the only person studying.
Right,
so,
right.
I actually have a fairly good relationship with industry. As I said, I work in environmental pollution as a whole. And one of the things I work specifically on is solutions and interventions. So I'm fairly well known with the groups that I work with. We can't solve this ourselves. It's not fair to tell everyone to stop buying plastic. It's not possible. There are no other alternatives a lot of the time for people to buy things. So you need to work with industry. And I think it's really important we don't alienate industry. They are the people who are going to be able to help us solve this problem. So I think there is a reticence to believe everything that's coming out in the scientific literature at the moment. They want to see more concrete proof, but I think they are well aware that there are issues, and most of them are willing to discuss what they might be able to do going forward, whether that be in the UK, we have something called the Microfiber Consortium. And a lot of the companies are international companies. So these are large clothing companies that, span across multiple countries. And they have all signed up voluntarily to try to reduce the amount of fibers that their clothing is releasing. So they're not necessarily saying they're going to stop using plastic, but they are certainly going to try to manufacture it so that it produces much less than it does at the moment. And I think that's the starting point. It's those sort of collaborations we start with, and then we work up.
Yeah, there's a lot of businesses that are centered around producing and selling these plastics. So like it's built around their entire business model. So I don't know what the alternative is because of how we use it in our everyday lives. It's in everything from cars to, like you said, food, to everything. So I don't know how we get away from, or what the other alternative is.
I don't see us removing plastic from our lives completely. I don't think that's a feasible thing to do at the moment. Like you say, in the aeronautical or the automobile industries, But then I think those plastics are very rigid plastics. They actually produce quite few microplastics. And so long as you have an end of life plan for them, so what happens when it's junked, don't just throw it into, a skip and allow it to degrade in the environment. So long as there's a proper process to try and reuse those plastics, however that may be, I think there are circular economy issues there. It's the single-use ones and the clothing and the textiles that I think are really problematic on a microplastic front. And I think those are the places that I think that there probably needs to be some move away from plastics as the sole source.
So knowing what you know, Fay, and like I said, you're in the trenches here. How do you operate your daily life with these plastics? Like what kind of considerations do you take knowing the stuff that you know? Do you do anything special that maybe some other folks could probably integrate into their lives?
So the first thing that I did was really reduce the amount of clothing that I have that is plastic. I didn't realize I've done this with a number of people, a couple of media personalities, where we've gone through their wardrobe and the look on their faces when they realize 3/4 of their wardrobe is plastic.
Oh,
There's this mentality that plastic is hard, that it's a water bottle or some kind of solid piece of plastic, and people don't think of fabric. They just, I think there's a disconnect in our minds. So when you start saying, okay, no, that's nylon, that's polyester, those are plastics, that's people tend to be quite shocked. And so what I say is, okay, we can't, well, I certainly couldn't afford to throw all that clothing away and then get new clothing. So just when it gets to the end of its life, put it in a fabric recycling center, and buy something that's not plastic. So just try to replace slowly. I have a couple of tops that are left, but pretty much all my clothing now is non-plastic. I don't buy it for my children. And I think in terms of in the home, it tends to be things, carpets, sofas, anything like that. I have really gotten rid of so that they are non-plastic. Anything that I have wood flooring, I have leather sofas, those sorts of things. That's not an option for everyone, I understand, but those are the sorts of things that we can do bit by bit to just try and reduce the amount that we're breathing in every day.
what about food? What about like water bottles and grocery shopping and stuff like that? Anything special you do there?
So I still have to get some of my stuff that's plastic wrapped. There's just no option. You go to the shops and there's no option. So I'm not suggesting people, go to these places that are plastic free. If they can, that's amazing, but people don't have time. So what I suggest is that as soon as you get it back, you open the things, you take them out of the plastic. If you're heating things in particular, try not to use a plastic Tupperware. You can get ceramic, use that, use ceramic and glass to heat things instead, and you're not going to be producing lots of microplastics there. So if you can buy without it being wrapped in plastic, that's what I would suggest. But if you can't, just think about how you're heating it and how you're storing it in the freezer, and see how much of the plastic you can remove before you do those things.
There's been times where I think back of when I was a kid, I would heat stuff in the microwave in plastic, or I would take it to work in Tupperware and heat it up, and then there'd be I'd heat it up too much, so then there'd be like holes in the Tupperware container, and
Yeah.
I was like, it just melted away. I never ever thought about it being melted into my food. It never occurred to me. I was like, it melted. It's fine. But now that crap scares the crap out of me,
Yeah, I think, we're all still here. We're all still alive. So I don't want people to panic. I don't want people to go, but I just think we are, there is another professor up in Scotland who once said, I can see no sentence that ever starts with the health benefits of breathing or eating plastic are. Yeah, and that's what I think. I think, really we need to just show common sense here. There is no benefit to it, and there is likely detriment. So try to reduce it as much as possible. I think it's particularly important for our children. I grew up in an era where actually there wasn't that much plastic. There was a lot less. And nowadays, children don't have that option because everything is covered in it. So I think it's important to make sure that we try and protect them as much as possible, because the amount they're going to have in their bodies will be higher than what we had, because they're going to have it for their whole lifespan. So, those are the things I think we should look at.
Do you have any insight of what's going on here in America? I'm curious what the progress is compared to what you see in the UK versus, experts that are in your area here in the States. Are we kind of on the same path, or is one country ahead of the other in regards to what we're finding?
I think in terms of what we're finding, we're pretty even. There's been some great work, particularly in the outdoor air microplastics, because you have so much. You have a lot more than we do.
Yeah.
So that there's been a lot of work, particularly in some of the nature reserves that you guys have over there. These wilderness areas, and that's where it's scary. This is a wilderness area. There are no people there. They're still covered in microplastics because it's coming out of the air. So that sort of thing's been really important for the rest of the world to see, so we can understand that these wilderness areas are still being affected, that, you know, you have this air current taking them places all around the world. In terms of the health aspects, I think really it's not even the UK or the US. I think a lot of that is coming out of Europe, particularly Norway and Denmark. I think we're getting there, but I would say that the UK and the US are pretty close on par. What I don't know, and I'm afraid I'll profess ignorance here, is what your policy is looking like. I know what policies are coming in the UK because I've worked with those people. I don't know what the policy landscape looks like for you over there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I imagine it being a lot more liberal here in the United States, even from an agricultural perspective. You know, or from a chemical perspective, what goes into our products here, we're a lot more liberal with things that go into those products versus other countries I know are a lot more strict. Like there's a whole list of stuff I saw that's banned in other countries, but is allowed to go into products here in the United States. I would, just from I guess that perspective, I imagine other countries being well ahead of the United States.
Yeah, I know, for example, that in Germany that they have banned a lot of areas of sludge to land. You know, I said we put a lot of our sludge, our sewage sludge as fertilizer on land, and they are so concerned about the microplastics and other chemicals in there that they've decided that they're not going to do that anymore. And so I think they're ahead. In France and in the UK, we're putting through legislation that filters on washing machines. You cannot buy a washing machine that doesn't have a filter to capture the microplastics before they go out into the environment. So things like that are definitely coming through over here. As I said, I don't know the American policy landscape very well, but my guess is like you, that there will be more reticence from policymakers to make a big deal of this. I think going forward, it's something that is going to be probably driven over here.
Are there any good filters that you know of that people can buy if they buy water bottles, or even if they get like 5-gallon water? Is there anything people could do or is there even a filter that can truly filter microplastics before consuming the water?
Yes, but the water would come out drip by drip. It would be extremely, extremely painful to drink from. I mean, the good thing is plastics are a physical particle, as I mentioned before. So if you put a filter there, anything bigger than that filter size is going to stay on the filter. The problem is that they can be so small that if you had a filter that was really an air filter on your water bottle, it'd be really hard to get the water out. I think the simplest things you can do are I'm assuming you have the same thing over there. We use tap water here. We drink the tap water, and actually I just use a softener because we have very hard water here, a lot of calcium in them. So that filters through a lot, and then I put it into an aluminium water bottle, and that keeps it cold all day. And I just top that up. That's how I get around it myself. I don't buy plastic water bottles unless, you know, it's a dire emergency and I really, really need to have a drink, but I try to avoid where I can.
Yeah, we're trying to escape from plastic water bottles at our house, but we got rid of all the Tupperware recently, and we got all glass. But it's even like the cooking utensils, everything, like until you start looking at stuff, it's like there's no escape. And sometimes my family gets a little annoyed at me because I'm like, oh, we need to do this like 110%. And they're like, well, we can't escape everything. Like we can't. And it's obviously, I know that, but I start thinking about like cooking with the spatula that's plastic and putting it on the pan. I'm like, well, this is melting a little bit. If I put it on high heat and I leave it on the pan long enough, it's melting into the food a little bit. It has to be. So it's almost like we can't escape this stuff.
So there has been a bit of work done on plastics. I mean, plastics are a use. I feel bad for the plastic industry at the moment. Well, not too bad, but they are useful. There are life-saving things that we do in hospitals that are going to require us to keep using plastic for some time, you know. So I you know, that there are places, but I would use wood. I use wooden utensils. Sometimes they char a little bit, but actually It's funny because quite a long time ago now, but about 10, maybe 15 years ago, I'm showing my age. Some work came out about chopping boards, and everybody had gone to plastic chopping boards because they were really handy and everything. And then what they found out was actually the bacteria were living much longer on plastic chopping boards. Wood has natural anesthetic things in it, the natural protection against these things. So as long as you wipe it down, you're better off having a wood chopping board. And when I thought that, I did the same with all my utensils as well. So I try and use predominantly wood or metal when we're in the kitchen.
We were looking at the wood too for the utensils, but then a lot of the utensils are covered. They have a coating on them. So it's just like, you can't escape any of this crap.
Yeah, I don't think it's an easy answer. I certainly can't say, and I wouldn't dream of saying to your listeners that I'm plastic free or anything like that. You know, we do what we can.
Right.
In terms of our health, I do believe we shouldn't panic. We shouldn't be like, it's horrific just yet. I do believe if we continue on the trajectory that we are on at the moment, it will become an issue going forward. I think particularly vulnerable populations, young children, the elderly, or people with underlying health issues, you know, such as asthma and things like that, are the likely people to have problems. I think that's where we're going to see the impacts first. So all I can say is, you know, just try your best to reduce what you can. Don't drive yourself crazy. You know, we all have to continue living, but just every time you buy something, just go, does it need to be plastic? And if it does, it does. But if it doesn't, then see about picking that other thing.
So I work for, full disclosure, I won't say who I work for, but I work for one of the largest plastic producing companies in the world. And there's a lot of money being spent and a lot of time and effort being spent on ways to reduce plastic waste and, you know, improve the circular economy and all that stuff. But it doesn't make its way out into the public sector very well. Like sometimes you'll see it on like some LinkedIn articles and stuff like that. So I don't want to, you know, I don't want to pretend like we're badgering the companies, because we're certainly not. I wish there was a way for them to make it more public, like of the work that they're doing, because they are doing great work. There's teams upon teams of people that are, their sole jobs are dedicated to sustainability and you know, reducing plastic waste. But the public doesn't really see that. You know what I mean? It doesn't really make its way out to the public sector very well.
We have a similar issues over here. Like I say, I work quite closely with a number of industries, and I think there is a public perception that bad versus good, and it's not as simple as that. It never is. I think that you know, nobody is purposely going out to destroy the environment or our health. I really don't believe that. I don't believe there's a nefarious plot to come out and hurt us. What there is sometimes is a lack of foresight. You know, the famous example is the same person who came up with CFCs for refrigerators, come up with leaded petrol. Two of the most horrific things that we did to the environment. That wasn't on purpose. They were revolutionary when they did that. It's about accepting that things have changed. We now know different things, and working, I like to think, with academia to do what we can to improve that. For example, in terms of the recycling, you know, the enzyme digestion side of things, as well as the mechanical digestion and all the different possible routes for the circular economy. So I think are amazing. My only proviso on that sometimes is, even if you reuse the plastic, it's still shedding microplastics. So I think it's amazing. Do recycle, absolutely. We're fanatical about it in our household. Absolutely recycle. But I don't think alone that solves the problem. I think it's part of the solution. I think part of the solution will have to be a reduction in use as well.
What are other areas of interest that you're studying, Faye, beyond microplastics? Are there any other stuff on the horizon that's just hasn't been made a big, big public yet. But what are some other things you're doing?
I think nothing as novel. It's that hard graft on the other subjects. People know about them. So again, I work heavily with the water industry to try and help with what's coming out from sewage. So things around eutrophication, where there's too many nutrients getting into our waters and blocking the waterways with too much algae. How we can help reduce that. And it's more, that's not new work, it's just work that's continuing to that constant improvement to reduce the amount that's coming out. I think I'm doing some about underwater sound. I don't know if you know about sound underwater travels much longer distances than it does in the air, and so most species underwater use sound. And I currently have a 4-year project with some rowers in the UK where they row continuously around the UK, so 3,000 kilometers nonstop for a month. They sleep on the boats, they don't stop. And they're collecting microplastics, but they're also collecting underwater noise for us to try and discern how the shipping lanes and the noise from those things are impacting on our biodiversity in our local waters. So those are the sorts of other things I do, other types of pollution. It might be sound, might be chemicals, such as petroleum hydrocarbons or heavy metals, and also obviously pathogens, things coming out that are not very nice, biofilms that might be E. coli and fecal coliforms.
Oh, the sound is very fascinating to me. So are you hypothesizing that like the ships are impacting sea life with the sounds?
So that's well known. That is something that has been studied. So large shipping lanes can have issues for migratory species, particularly whales and dolphins who use their sound either for direction but also for mating, and it's impacting their ability to do that. But a lot of other species, and I think this is the new side of things, we know a bit more about whales and dolphins because they're kind of, cute and great to look at, and we want to know more. But a lot of the other species in the water, maybe not so interesting looking, they are also using sound. They might use sound to find their prey. They might use sound to hide from their prey. They might hear their prey and go hide. But if you've got noise from boats going on in the background, it means that they're less likely, their survival is less likely. So we're just trying to get a baseline soundscape for the next couple of years around the UK. And we've already found some really interesting things. The number of species that are using sound, we're just learning constantly how many more are using it than we thought they were.
That's fascinating. Have you done any studying, or has anyone done studying on deciphering what the whales or the dolphins are quote unquote saying, what the sounds mean?
I must admit, this is not my area of expertise. You would need to speak to the marine biologists. They have experts in that. But yes, there has been work to look at whether it's a hunting song or whether it's a mating song. And what they might mean by some of the interpretations. There's some great sounds we've had of the porpoises and the dolphins, and because we have because I work across a number of different disciplines, I actually have some astrophysicists studying this for me. So they normally listen, I should say, to sounds in space to try and decipher a variety of anomalies in space that they can then go on to map the universe. And I said, can you do this? I have all this underwater noise stuff, and you're much better on a computer than me. Can you look at it? And they are really doing an amazing job. Because they have the skills to look at those large data sets really fast. They are finding all sorts of things out for me. So I don't know myself what the whales and dolphins are saying, but I can certainly hear them. And I think the interesting thing for us is going to be how that changes. If we have a baseline and we do that year on year for 10 years, 20 years, does it change? We're also taking environmental DNA, which means we're looking at the biodiversity in these areas. So if the sound noise level goes up, does it impact the number of species that live there? So that's going to be really interesting going forward, I think. It's one of my newer projects that we're working on, and I'm really excited about that one.
So how are they collecting these sounds? Is it attached to the boat, and it just how deep is it?
So normally a hydrophone would be as deep as possible to get rid of the noise from the waves. This is why I need astrophysicists rather than just your general marine biology sound people. The sound from the it's on the rudder of the rowing boat, which means it's not very deep at all. It's
Okay.
probably a meter at maximum, a meter below the sound. So you get the sound of the oars and you get the sound of the waves. But what these guys are doing for me is they're screening that out so that we're just hearing boat noise or animal noise. Particularly what I'm interested in there, everybody's focused on the big ships, but I don't know. I'm assuming in America it's much the same as here, that we have these large marinas with huge numbers of pleasure boats.
Oh yeah.
And don't focus on that at all. And in the summer, the noise from those, I mean, you think about the noise of a jet ski above the water. I mean, underwater, it sounds awful. Trust me. I've listened to one. And if you have lots of those out at the same time, I think that's going to be a huge impact as well. So that's something we're looking at too.
So what are some of the ways that it's impacting? You mentioned a couple of them, but like hunting, fishing, what are some other, it moves them all the way out to other parts of the ocean? Like, what are you thinking?
No, so often they'll live with it. But I liken it to the fact that when we think about sound pollution, we think about our noisy neighbor. We think about a neighbor next door who's having a party, and you knock on the door and you're like, shut up, please. And then these guys can't. They can't do that. So they just live with it. And what they found, this is not my word, other people have found this, is that that how healthy that individual is can be severely impacted by it. So imagine that noise is going on, that party doesn't stop. It just constantly, day in, day out, day in, day out. It would drive you crazy. It would make you feel bad. You'd feel stressed. And that's what we're seeing with the animals, that they are very stressed. And some of them are really struggling in health aspects. So I think that's one of the big things. We obviously, other than the hunting and the fishing and the mating, which we know that they need, it's just general health is impacted by a constant noise.
Have you done any research on chemicals in agriculture? Like as far as the toxins or herbicides or pesticides that are used in agriculture?
So I haven't looked at their impacts on the food, but I have looked at their impacts as they wash off into the water. So again, as an environmental rather than as a food pollution expert. So it is obviously an area of extreme interest when we're looking at the health of our rivers. Although we look at sewage treatment as a point source, that means it's coming from a single point, which makes it really easy to put an intervention in because you know where it's coming from. We also look at diffuse sources, and that's nearly entirely from agriculture. So a lot of herbicides, insecticides, things like that, as well as excessive nutrients, excessive fertilizer that's going onto the land and then just washing into the rivers.
We're a destructive creature, aren't we? I mean, it's almost like we leave a trail of wherever we're at, whether it's agriculture or marine, we're kind of leaving a dirty trail behind us. It's kind of crazy to think about.
But on a positive, I would hate to finish this on a very, very negative note like that. On a positive, I think we are heading in the right direction. Knowledge is power. I've always believed that. That's why I'm a scientist. And the more we know about it and more we understand about how it works, the better we can control this and try and stop it. Now we know, don't put the fertilizer on this much, don't bring it into the fields at this time when it's raining, etc. And we can start to really reduce the impact. In fact, they cleaned up the sewage so much they had the oyster farmers complaining because the oysters weren't getting as big because they weren't eating as much stuff, which was mostly coming out from the sewage treatment. So there are good things happening. There's a lot of work going on, a lot of people, fighting hard for the environment. It's all about getting government and policy on board, because once that's there, or industry, they're the real drivers. So it's getting them on board with us.
Yeah. Well, Fay, I appreciate this time. I love the work you're doing. People like you, it amazes me, and I love talking to y'all. So is there a way people can follow your work? Do you have a website, social media, anything like that?
So I'm a social media pariah. So I don't have any social media. I don't really understand it. It's and I find it quite stressful.
It is. It's very stressful.
I do have a LinkedIn profile, which I haven't updated for a while, but I'll certainly do so for the next little while after this. This has reminded me I need to do that. But on the microplastic side, we have at the university, I lead the microplastics research group. So the University of Portsmouth microplastics research group, and you should come and you'd be able to see me, and you'll be able to see a lot of my work through there.
Outstanding. Well, Fay, I appreciate your time, and it was a pleasure talking to you, and hopefully in a year or so we can connect again and see what else has new emerged. So
well, it was really nice speaking to you, and thank you for your interest. It's always really good for a scientist to hear that people care about what they're doing.
Absolutely.
It's not always the case.
Absolutely. I love it, Fay. Well, you have a good evening, and I'll let you know when this comes out. I'll shoot you an email.
That's great. Thanks very much, John.
Thank you, Fay.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.